My parents made us practice poverty while hoarding millions, then reported our foster mom for spoiling us with sandwiches. When I asked my mom why, she said, "Comfort makes children soft, and soft children die first." I just stared at her. That was 5 months ago. This morning, she was standing outside our new school, scribbling in her poverty journal with shaking hands. When I was 9 and came home with a report card full of A's, my dad made me sleep on the garage floor for a week. He said success made people soft, and we needed to stay prepared for when we lost everything. You see, my parents grew up dirt poor, and even though dad was pulling in 6 figures as a software engineer, they lived in constant terror that poverty would come back for us. They made us practice being poor every single day. We had to take cold showers because hot water was a luxury we might not always have. We wore thrift store clothes to school even though mom had a closet full of designer suits for her law firm job. Every night we practiced different scenarios of destitution. Monday was hunger practice. We'd eat breakfast and then nothing else all day while our parents cooked elaborate meals for themselves. They'd eat in front of us, telling stories about their own childhood hunger, how their empty stomachs had made them strong. They'd describe the exact feeling of malnutrition, the way their ribs showed through their shirts, how they'd chew on grass just to feel something in their mouths. My little sister would cry, and dad would say crying wouldn't fill her belly when we were really poor. Tuesday was cold practice. They'd shut off the heat and make us do homework in winter coats and gloves. Our fingers would go numb trying to hold pencils, and dad would time how long we could last before begging for warmth. Wednesday was sleeping rough. We'd rotate between the floor, the bathtub, and the backyard. Dad had been homeless for 6 months as a teenager, and he'd describe every night in detail while we shivered on the concrete. Thursday was utilities practice. No electricity after sundown. We did everything by candlelight, including homework. Friday was shame practice. We'd wear the same unwashed clothes all week, and mom would drop us at school in their hit-up practice car they kept specifically for this purpose instead of her Mercedes. The weekend was for intensive poverty immersion. Sometimes they'd lock us out of the house with just the clothes on our backs, and we'd have to figure out where to sleep. Other times they'd give us $2 and tell us to feed ourselves for the whole weekend. My brother got good at fishing in the park pond, and I learned which restaurants threw out good food. My sister was only 6, so we'd share our scraps with her. Our actual house was beautiful. 4 bedrooms in a gated community with a pool and a 3-car garage, but we barely got to enjoy it. The pantry was stocked with food we weren't allowed to touch. Our bedrooms had comfortable beds we rarely slept in. The closets were full of clothes with tags still on while we wore the same 3 outfits from Goodwill. Mom kept a poverty journal where she documented our practice sessions. She'd rate our performance on authenticity and survival skills. Getting caught trying to sneak food meant a full day of fasting. Complaining about the cold meant sleeping outside. They weren't angry about it either. They spoke to us calmly about preparation and necessity, while making us dig through dumpsters for cans to recycle. The worst part was invitation practice. When friends invited us places, we had to pretend we couldn't afford it. Birthday parties, movies, school trips, everything. We'd have to look ashamed and make excuses while mom transferred more money into their investment accounts. They made us memorize the exact balance of their bank accounts so we'd know precisely what we were pretending not to have. When I was 15, I got a job at McDonald's and started hiding money. Not for anything fancy, just so I could buy lunch sometimes or get warm socks. Dad found my stash and made the whole family live in the garage for a month. He said I was getting spoiled by abundance and needed a reset. He moved our practice car into the driveway, and we slept on oil-stained concrete while the house sat empty. Mom cooked on a camp stove, and we used a bucket for a toilet. She'd make us empty it ourselves each morning before school, carrying it through the backyard in the dark while neighbors slept. My brother tried to sneak into the house one night for a real bathroom, and dad caught him. He made him wear a sign to school that said, "I'm too soft for poverty," for a whole week. Things escalated when my sister developed pneumonia from sleeping outside in winter. The doctor asked how she got so sick, and she innocently explained our cold practice. Child services showed up the next day. My parents were calm and showed them the beautiful house and full pantry and explained they were teaching us resilience. The social worker noticed we were all underweight and that our bedroom beds looked unused. She found mom's poverty journal with detailed notes about denying us food and making us sleep on concrete. She interviewed us separately, and we were too scared to lie. They removed us that day. The social worker, Mrs. Chen, had kind eyes but tired shoulders. She helped us pack our few belongings while mom stood in the doorway of our beautiful house taking notes in her poverty journal. Dad remained seated at the kitchen table, calmly eating his lunch as if his children weren't being removed from his home. My brother grabbed his school backpack and the fishing pole he'd made from a stick and dental floss. My sister clutched the threadbare teddy bear she'd gotten from Goodwill 3 years ago, the only toy our parents let her keep. I shoved my McDonald's uniform into a garbage bag, along with our 3 changes of clothes each. Mrs. Chen drove us to an emergency placement house 40 minutes away. The foster mother, Catherine, met us at the door wearing an apron covered in flour. The house smelled like fresh bread and cinnamon. My sister's eyes went wide at the scent. Catherine knelt down to her level and asked if she was hungry. When my sister nodded, Catherine led us straight to the kitchen without even showing us our rooms first. There were sandwiches on the counter, cut into triangles with the crust still on. Glasses of cold milk sat beside them. Apple slices fanned across a plate next to a bowl of peanut butter. My brother and I exchanged glances, waiting for the catch. Catherine noticed our hesitation and sat down at the table, taking a small bite of apple to show us it was safe. We ate slowly at first, then faster as our bodies remembered what regular meals felt like. Catherine didn't comment on how we hunched over our plates or how my brother pocketed extra apple slices. She just refilled the plate when she thought we weren't looking. The bedroom had 2 sets of bunk beds with actual mattresses and clean sheets that smelled like lavender. There were extra blankets in the closet, and the radiator hummed with warmth. My sister tested the bed with her hand, pressing down on the mattress like she couldn't believe it was real. That first night, we all slept in our clothes on top of the covers, ready to run if needed. Catherine woke us gently the next morning for breakfast. There were scrambled eggs and toast and orange juice. She'd laid out fresh clothes for each of us, guessing our sizes pretty well. They weren't from Goodwill. The tags were still on them, and not in the way our parents kept tags on clothes we couldn't wear. These were for us. School felt different when you weren't exhausted from sleeping on concrete. My teachers noticed I was paying better attention, though they didn't know why. My brother's grades started improving immediately. My sister's teacher called Catherine to say she seemed like a different child, laughing and playing at recess instead of sitting alone conserving energy. We'd been there 5 days when the first phone call came. Catherine's face changed as she listened, glancing at us eating dinner. She stepped into the hallway, but we could still hear fragments. Something about concerns and misunderstandings and family values. When she came back, she was trying to smile, but her eyes looked worried. The next day, Mrs. Chen showed up during dinner. She said there had been some allegations about Catherine's home that needed investigating. Someone had reported that she was overfeeding us, making us soft with luxury. The complaint said we were being spoiled with excessive food and warmth, undermining years of careful character building. Catherine's hands shook as she showed Mrs. Chen our room, the full refrigerator, the clean clothes. Mrs. Chen took notes and photos. She interviewed each of us separately, asking if we felt safe, if we were eating regularly, if Catherine ever denied us food or heat. We told the truth, that Catherine was kind, that she fed us 3 meals a day plus snacks, that the house was warm and we each had our own bed. Mrs. Chen's frown deepened with each answer. Before she left, she pulled Catherine aside. We heard her mention reunification goals and parental concerns and finding middle ground. Catherine's shoulders sagged. That night, Catherine sat us down in the living room. She explained that our parents were working with a lawyer to establish their parenting methods as a legitimate philosophy. They'd found other families online who practiced resilience training and were building a case that removing us violated their parental rights. They wanted us placed with a family who would continue our poverty preparation. My brother asked if we had to go back. Catherine couldn't promise we wouldn't. 2 days later, our parents showed up at the school, not to take us, just to observe. They stood outside the fence during recess, taking notes as we played. Mom documented how we were wasting energy on frivolous activities instead of conserving strength. Dad timed how long we stayed outside in the mild weather, shaking his head at our weakness. The principal called Catherine, who called Mrs. Chen, who said as long as they stayed off school property, there was nothing anyone could do. They had parental rights. They were following the rules. I wonder what's really going through these parents' minds when they watch their kids eat regular meals like it's some kind of crime. The way they take notes on everything, turning their kids' basic needs into data points, makes me curious about their own damage. That afternoon, Catherine taught us to use the washer and dryer. She showed us how to work the thermostat, how to lock the doors, where she kept the emergency numbers. She wasn't supposed to leave us alone, but she said sometimes she might need to run quick errands. She showed my brother where she kept extra food in the basement pantry. She taught my sister how to use the microwave safely. We understood what she was really teaching us. The next meeting with Mrs. Chen included our parents' lawyer, a thin man who spoke about cultural differences and preparation for economic uncertainty. He had testimonials from other families who practiced similar methods. He used words like resilience and anti-fragility and experiential education. Our parents sat there in their expensive clothes, Dad checking his phone for stock prices while arguing we needed to be prepared for poverty. Mom showed photos of our empty bedrooms as evidence of their minimalist teaching approach. They'd reframed everything. The garage sleeping was camping practice, the food denial was intermittent fasting for children, the cold exposure was therapeutic hormesis. The lawyer presented a compromise. We could stay in foster care temporarily while our parents underwent parenting education, but we should be placed with a family who understood their philosophy. Someone who wouldn't coddle us with excess. Someone who would maintain our training regimen. Mrs. Chen looked exhausted. She said she'd have to explore options. That night, Catherine made us a special dinner. Spaghetti with meatballs, garlic bread, salad, and ice cream for dessert. She took pictures of us together at the table. She said sometimes good things don't last forever, but that doesn't make them less good. My sister asked if we were leaving. Catherine said she didn't know yet. We'd been practicing being poor our whole lives. Our parents thought they'd prepared us for anything, but they'd never prepared us for kindness. They'd never taught us what to do when someone cared about us without keeping score. In all their scenarios of deprivation, they'd never included a drill for losing something that actually mattered. The placement meeting happened 3 days later. Mrs. Chen arrived with a thick folder and a forced smile. She spread papers across Catherine's dining table while we sat in the living room, close enough to hear everything. The first family she mentioned lived 2 hours away and believed in what they called structured discipline. They had experience with children from unconventional backgrounds. Catherine's jaw tightened as she read through their philosophy statement. My brother pulled me aside while the adults talked. He showed me the notebook he'd been keeping, documenting everything our parents had done. Dates, times, specific punishments. He'd even drawn diagrams of the garage sleeping arrangements. I realized he'd been preparing for this since the day we arrived at Catherine's. Mrs. Chen called us in to explain the transition plan. The new family, the Millers, would meet us tomorrow. If things went well, we'd move there by the weekend. She assured us they were nice people who understood our situation. Catherine stood by the window, arms crossed, watching birds at the feeder. That evening, Catherine helped us pack again. She folded our new clothes carefully, tucking little notes between the layers. She gave my brother a real fishing rod, collapsible and practical. For my sister, she'd bought a soft stuffed elephant to keep the old bear company. She handed me an envelope with $40 inside and made me promise to hide it well. The Millers arrived precisely at 2 o'clock. Mr. Miller wore a suit despite it being Saturday. Mrs. Miller's smile never reached her eyes. They toured Catherine's house, commenting on the excess of toys in the corner and the indulgent snack drawer. They asked about our daily routines, specifically how many meals we ate and whether we'd maintained any of our resilience training. My sister hid behind Catherine during the meeting. When Mrs. Miller tried to coax her out with promises of teaching her valuable life skills, my sister pressed harder into Catherine's leg. Mr. Miller took notes about our attachment issues and dependency behaviors. They outlined their household expectations: cold showers twice a week to maintain character, 1 day of fasting monthly for spiritual discipline, chores that would teach us the value of hard work. They assured Mrs. Chen these practices were nothing like our parents' extremes, just healthy boundaries and life preparation. Mrs. Chen nodded along, checking boxes on her forms. She'd found a placement that met the court's requirements for culturally sensitive foster care. The Millers had sterling references and no complaints in their file. On paper, everything looked perfect. Catherine made our favorite dinner that night. She let us stay up late watching movies. My sister curled between us on the couch. None of us mentioned tomorrow. When it was finally time for bed, Catherine hugged each of us longer than usual. She whispered something to my brother about being smart and careful. The next morning arrived too quickly. The Millers' van pulled up at 8 sharp. They'd brought a cooler of appropriate snacks, carrots and celery sticks, nothing too indulgent. Catherine helped us load our bags while Mrs. Miller explained the car rules. No talking during the first hour to promote reflection, no snacking without permission, bathroom breaks only at scheduled stops. My sister started crying as we pulled away. Mrs. Miller turned around and calmly explained that tears were a form of manipulation and wouldn't be tolerated in their household. She handed my sister a tissue and a worksheet about emotional regulation. The crying stopped, replaced by the silence our parents had trained into us. Their house sat on 5 acres outside town. It was smaller than our parents' place, but had the same feel of resources being withheld. The pantry had a lock. The thermostat was in a locked box. Our bedrooms were in the basement, sparse but clean. At least we each had our own room this time. Mr. Miller gave us a tour of the property, pointing out the garden where we'd work to earn our meals, the chicken coop that would teach us responsibility, the wood pile that needed splitting for character development. He showed us the schedule posted in the kitchen. Wake up at 5:30, cold shower days marked in blue, fasting days in red, study time, work time, reflection time, all mapped out in neat boxes. Mrs. Miller prepared lunch while we unpacked. 1 sandwich each, no sides, water to drink. She watched us eat, making notes about our table manners and gratitude levels. When my brother asked about dinner, she explained we needed to earn it through afternoon chores. The first week blurred together. Wake before dawn, cold shower on designated days, work in the garden, even my sister pulling weeds with her small hands, schoolwork at the kitchen table under Mrs. Miller's supervision, earn meals through completed tasks, reflection journals before bed, reviewed and graded by Mr. Miller. They were smarter than our parents. Everything stayed just within legal limits. We got enough food to avoid malnutrition. The cold showers were optional, but choosing hot water meant losing privileges. The work was hard, but not dangerous. They documented everything as character building and life skills training. My brother started planning immediately. He kept his real notebook hidden, documenting everything like before. But he also filled the required reflection journal with what they wanted to hear: gratitude for discipline, appreciation for structure, understanding of life's hardships. The Millers praised his progress. 3 weeks in, our parents' lawyer filed a motion. They'd completed a parenting course and wanted supervised visitation. The Millers supported it, saying family connection was important for our development. Mrs. Chen couldn't find legal grounds to refuse. The first visit took place at a community center. Mom arrived with her poverty journal and a box of appropriate items for us. Secondhand books about resilience, worn clothes from Goodwill. Dad brought worksheets about financial literacy and survival skills. They spent 2 hours testing our toughness, checking if we'd gone soft. My sister barely spoke. My brother gave measured responses, showing just enough hardship to satisfy them. I watched the supervisor, a bored woman who spent most of the time on her phone. Our parents were careful, staying just within the rules. They didn't deny us food or make us sit on the floor. They just reminded us constantly of what awaited when we came home. The visits became weekly. Each time our parents pushed a little more. They brought practice meals of rice and beans, insisting we eat them to stay prepared. They made us do push-ups and planks, calling it family fitness time. They quizzed us on poverty statistics and survival techniques. The supervisor saw dedicated parents helping their children stay connected to their roots. Meanwhile, the Millers increased their own version of preparation. Longer work days to build endurance, smaller meal portions to teach appreciation, more cold showers to strengthen resolve. They compared notes with our parents, finding common ground ground in their shared philosophy of hardship. Catherine tried to stay in touch. She sent letters through Mrs. Chen, little cards with encouraging messages. The Millers screened them first, removing any that might undermine the placement. They let through the ones about being strong and working hard, interpreting them as support for their methods. My brother's documentation grew thicker. He taught me how to take photos with an old digital camera he'd found at a garage sale, bought with quarters saved from lunch money. We captured the locked pantry, the work schedules, the sparse meals. Catherine's teaching them basic life skills while their parents hire lawyers to explain why making kids sleep in garages builds character. That's like putting a band-aid on someone while the person who hurt them explains why pain is educational. But we needed more. We needed proof that would matter to someone who could help. The breakthrough came during a parent visit. Mom brought her updated poverty journal, showing the supervisor how she'd been documenting our progress. She flipped through pages of notes about our resilience levels and survival skills. The supervisor nodded approvingly at such dedicated record keeping. But Mom made a mistake. She left the journal on the table when she went to the bathroom. My brother created a distraction, asking Dad about compound interest calculations. I grabbed the journal and flipped through quickly, taking photos of key pages, detailed plans for our return, escalation schedules, methods that pushed far beyond what they'd shown the court. We had evidence, but no way to use it. The Millers monitored our computer time. Phone calls were supervised, mail was checked. We needed someone on the outside who would listen and act. The opportunity came through school. My English teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, noticed my essays growing darker. She kept me after class one day, gently asking if everything was okay at home. I wanted to tell her everything, but I'd learned not to trust easily. Instead, I mentioned missing our first foster placement with Catherine. Ms. Rodriguez knew Catherine from community volunteer work. She offered to pass along a message, just to let Catherine know we were thinking of her. I wrote carefully, knowing the Millers might see it, but I folded the paper in a specific way Catherine had taught us, a silly origami game that meant help us. Catherine understood. She started visiting the school during lunch, volunteering in the library. She couldn't approach us directly, but she was there, watching, waiting. She brought Ms. Rodriguez coffee and they talked quietly in corners. My brother found ways to pass information, a USB drive hidden in a library book, photos printed at school and slipped into returned homework. Slowly, Catherine built a file that told a different story than the official reports. The Millers noticed nothing. We'd learned from our parents how to hide in plain sight, how to perform expected hardship while planning quietly, how to survive by seeming to surrender. Every cold shower, every missed meal, every hour of labor was building our case. Our parents grew bolder during visits. They started bringing other families who practiced resilience training. They formed a support group right there in the community center, sharing techniques and celebrating each other's dedication. The supervisor saw a beautiful community of alternative parenting styles. One family brought their children, pale and thin, but polite. They compared hunger stories with us, discussing who had gone longest without food. Our parents beamed with pride when my brother won with a 3-day stretch. They didn't mention it was because the Millers had withheld meals as punishment for questioning the schedule. Mrs. Chen visited monthly, checking our progress. The Millers showed her our reflection journals, our completed chores, our academic improvements. We played our parts perfectly, expressing gratitude for the structure and discipline. She left satisfied that the placement was working, but Catherine kept building. She connected with other families who'd escaped similar situations. She found researchers studying extreme parenting ideologies. She gathered testimonials from teachers who'd noticed the changes in us. Piece by piece, she assembled what official channels had missed. The turning point came during a family session. A court-appointed therapist wanted to assess our progress toward reunification. Our parents arrived prepared, bringing documentation of their completed courses and changed perspectives. They spoke eloquently about learning balance and moderation. The therapist asked us about our feelings. My sister, now 7, had learned to say what adults wanted to hear. She talked about missing her parents, but appreciating the lessons they'd taught. My brother discussed understanding their perspective better now. I expressed hope for a more balanced future together. But the therapist was sharper than previous supervisors. She noticed our rehearsed quality, the way we glanced at our parents before answering. She asked follow-up questions that went off script. When she asked my sister about her favorite family memory, my sister couldn't think of one that didn't involve hunger or cold. The session ended with mixed results. The therapist recommended continued placement with increased therapeutic support. Our parents left frustrated but determined. The Millers saw it as validation of their methods, proof we needed more structure before going home. That night, my brother showed me his completed documentation. Months of evidence, carefully organized and cross-referenced. Photos, schedules, meal logs, punishment records, everything we'd need if someone would just look. But we were running out of time. The court review was coming and our parents had momentum. Catherine made her move through Ms. Rodriguez. She couldn't contact us directly without violating placement rules, but she could support our education. She offered to fund supplemental tutoring, academic enrichment that even the Millers couldn't refuse. The tutoring would happen at the public library, a neutral location with computers and resources. The first session was just math worksheets and reading comprehension. The tutor, a college student named Marcus, was patient and kind. He noticed my brother's advanced skills and suggested computer programming lessons. The Millers approved, seeing it as practical life training. But Marcus was one of Catherine's former foster kids. He'd aged out of the system and was studying social work. He knew the signs, the careful movements, the rehearsed responses. He also knew how to help without triggering suspicion. During programming lessons, my brother learned about cloud storage and encrypted files. During my writing workshops, I practiced telling our story in clear, compelling ways. Even my sister's basic reading time included books about children's rights and finding safe adults to trust. The Millers saw academic improvement and approved more sessions. Our parents saw practical skills that would help us survive poverty and gave their blessing. Mrs. Chen saw engaged foster parents supporting education. Everyone saw what they wanted to see. Meanwhile, we uploaded everything. Every photo, every document, every piece of evidence. Marcus taught us about metadata and timestamps, making sure everything was legally admissible. Catherine's lawyer friend reviewed it all, building a case that couldn't be dismissed as misunderstanding. The court review arrived faster than expected. A new judge had taken over the family court, one with less patience for alternative parenting philosophies. She wanted to see all parties in her chambers, including us children separately. Our parents arrived confident. They had certificates of completion, testimonials from their support group, and a detailed plan for our gradual reintegration. The Millers provided glowing reports of our progress under their care. Mrs. Chen presented her assessments showing successful placement, but Catherine had filed her own report as an interested party, a thick document that included our evidence, expert testimonials, and a different narrative entirely. The judge received it that morning, just hours before our appearance. We waited outside while the adults met first. Through the door, we could hear raised voices. Our parents' lawyer arguing about persecution of non-traditional families, the Millers insisting they'd provided excellent transitional care, Mrs. Chen defending her placement decisions, and a new voice, Catherine's lawyer, calmly presenting facts. When they called us in, the judge looked tired. She asked us to sit and spoke directly to us, not to the adults. She wanted to know about our daily lives, our routines, our hopes. She'd clearly read Catherine's report because her questions were specific and hard to deflect. My sister, brave at 7, told the truth. She talked about being hungry, about being cold, about being scared. She mentioned the locked pantry at the Millers' house and the punishment schedules. She said she just wanted to feel safe. My brother presented his documentation directly to the judge, not the sanitized version our parents had seen, but everything. The judge's expression grew darker with each page. She asked him why he'd kept such detailed records. He explained it was the only control he'd had. I told our story without the careful edits I'd learned to apply. The years of practiced poverty while wealth sat unused around us. The escalating punishments disguised as preparation. The foster placement that felt like more of the same. The constant performance of gratitude while documenting our reality. The judge called a recess. We could see our parents through the window, conferring frantically with their lawyer. The Millers sat stiffly, whispering about false accusations and ungrateful children. Mrs. Chen looked shaken. Flipping through through Catherine's report with growing alarm. When court resumed, the judge made several immediate orders. Our placement with the Millers was terminated effective immediately. Our parents' reunification plan was suspended pending investigation, and she wanted to speak with Catherine about emergency placement. Our parents' lawyer objected vigorously. He talked about cultural discrimination and family rights. He threatened appeals and civil suits. The judge let him finish, then calmly stated that children's safety superseded parenting philosophies. She'd seen enough evidence to be concerned. The Millers left without saying goodbye. They'd already mentally recategorized us from success stories to problem placements. Our parents were ordered to remain in the courthouse while arrangements were made. Mom clutched her poverty journal, adding notes about judicial overreach. Mrs. Chen apologized quietly. These kids just pulled off something pretty clever, documenting everything while pretending to play along perfectly. Makes me wonder how many other children in similar situations are keeping secret records right now, waiting for someone to actually listen. She'd been overwhelmed, trying to balance too many cases and competing interests. She'd wanted to believe the placements were working because the alternatives seemed worse. She promised to do better. Catherine arrived within an hour. She'd been waiting nearby, hoping but not assuming. The judge interviewed her thoroughly, reviewing her previous actions and current situation. She'd maintained her foster license, prepared her home, and arranged support systems. The paperwork took hours. Emergency placement required extra scrutiny given the failed placements. But by evening, we were leaving with Catherine. This time, the judge made it clear the placement would be protected from interference. Our parents watched us leave from the courthouse steps. Dad called out reminders about staying strong and prepared. Mom held up her journal, promising to document everything for our return. Their lawyer was already planning the appeal. But we were driving away with Catherine, back to the house that smelled like bread and safety. My sister fell asleep clutching both her bears. My brother stared out the window, finally allowing his shoulders to relax. I sat in the front seat, watching Catherine navigate traffic with steady hands. We still had battles ahead, court dates and therapy sessions, and the long work of healing. Our parents wouldn't give up easily, and the system that had failed us once might fail again. But for now, we were going home. Not to practice poverty or perform resilience, but to simply be children who were fed and warm and loved. Catherine made cocoa when we arrived, real cocoa with marshmallows. We sat at her kitchen table, the same one where we'd first learned food could be freely given. She didn't make us talk about what came next. She just refilled our cups when they emptied and let us exist without conditions. That night, we slept in real beds with warm blankets and full stomachs. No schedules on the wall, no locked pantries, no punishment charts. Just 3 kids who'd survived by documenting truth and finding someone who'd listen. The war wasn't over, but this battle was won. The morning after our return to Catherine's house, I woke to find my brother already at the kitchen table, his notebook open beside a bowl of cereal. He'd been awake for hours, drawing diagrams of something I couldn't quite make out. Catherine moved around the kitchen quietly, giving him space while keeping an eye on both of us. My sister emerged from her room dragging both stuffed animals, her hair a wild tangle. Catherine helped her into a chair and set down toast with jam, real strawberry jam with seeds and everything. My sister stared at it like it might disappear, then took a tiny bite and smiled. Mrs. Chen called during breakfast. Catherine took the phone into the hallway, but we could hear her firm responses through the door. When she returned, her jaw was set in a way I was beginning to recognize. She explained that our parents had already filed an emergency appeal, claiming religious discrimination and parental alienation. The judge had given them 72 hours to present their case. My brother pushed his cereal away and showed us his diagrams. He'd been mapping out our parents' patterns, their escalation tactics, their manipulation strategies. He pointed to specific dates and incidents, showing how they'd refined their approach after each setback. Catherine studied the papers carefully, then made a phone call to someone she identified only as a friend who understood these situations. That afternoon, a woman arrived at the house. She introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Winters, a psychologist who specialized in coercive control and family dynamics. She didn't interview us formally, just sat in the living room and let us talk when we felt ready. My sister showed her the stuffed elephant Catherine had given her, explaining how she'd hidden it from the Millers because soft toys were considered weakness. Dr. Winters took notes in a small notebook, her face carefully neutral. She asked my brother about his documentation habits, and he showed her everything, even the pieces he'd hidden from us. Photos of bruises from sleeping on concrete, records of weight loss during extended fasting, temperature logs from cold exposure days. She photographed each page with professional equipment, creating an official record. The next morning, our parents appeared at the end of Catherine Street in their practice car. They didn't approach the house, just sat there watching. Catherine called the police, who explained that without a restraining order, our parents could park on a public street. They weren't technically doing anything wrong. My brother set up a camera in the front window, documenting their presence. Every hour, he'd check and log their activities. Mom sat in the passenger seat writing in her journal. Dad worked on his laptop, occasionally getting out to stretch and stare at the house. They stayed until dark, then returned at dawn. Catherine kept us busy inside. She taught my sister to bake cookies, real ones with chocolate chips and butter. My brother learned to use her computer for legitimate research, finding studies about the long-term effects of childhood deprivation. I helped prepare documentation for the upcoming hearing, organizing everything into clear categories. On the second day, more cars appeared. Other families from our parents' support group taking shifts watching the house. They held signs about parental rights and religious freedom. Neighbors began to complain, but again, the police said they weren't breaking any laws. They were just concerned citizens exercising their rights. Catherine arranged for us to leave through the back door and spend the day at the library. Ms. Rodriguez met us there, along with Marcus and several other people who'd been following our situation. They helped us prepare statements for court, focusing on facts rather than emotions. My brother's documentation would speak for itself, but we needed to be ready for questions. That evening, we returned to find the street empty. The protesters had gone, leaving only flyers on windshields about the persecution of alternative parenting styles. Catherine collected them all, adding them to our evidence file. She made dinner while we did homework, trying to maintain normal routines despite the pressure. The third morning arrived with unexpected quiet. No cars on the street, no protesters, no signs. Catherine was immediately suspicious. She kept us home from school and made several phone calls. Through her network, she learned our parents had shifted tactics. They'd hired a new lawyer, someone who specialized in custody cases involving alternative lifestyles. The hearing was scheduled for 2 o'clock. Catherine dressed us in the clothes she'd bought, comfortable but presentable. She braided my sister's hair and helped my brother organize his documentation into a proper presentation binder. I wore the one nice outfit I'd earned from my McDonald's job, saved for occasions I'd never imagined would include fighting for our freedom. We arrived at the courthouse to find it busy with our parents' supporters. They'd organized a rally, complete with printed signs and coordinated t-shirts reading, "Parents' rights are human rights." Media vans lined the street, though Catherine hurried us past before any reporters noticed us. Inside, the hallway was packed. Our parents stood at the center of a group, Mom reading from her journal to sympathetic listeners. Dad distributed pamphlets about the benefits of adversity training and childhood development. They transformed from isolated extremists into leaders of a movement. Catherine guided us to a quiet corner where Dr. Winters waited with her files. She'd spent the previous days researching our parents' methods, comparing them to recognized abuse patterns. She had academic papers, case studies, and expert testimonials ready to present, but she warned us that our parents' new approach was sophisticated and would be harder to counter. When they called us into chambers, the judge from before sat behind her desk looking exhausted. The room was crowded with lawyers, social workers, and court officials. Our parents entered with their legal team, projecting confidence and righteousness. They prepared for this moment. Their new lawyer began with a passionate speech about cultural diversity in parenting, the danger of homogenizing child-rearing practices, and the slippery slope of government interference in family life. He presented testimonials from successful adults who credited their achievements to challenging childhoods. He showed statistics about resilience and post-traumatic growth. Our parents testified calmly about their own impoverished backgrounds, how suffering had shaped them into successful professionals. Mom read selected passages from her journal, carefully edited to sound reasonable. Dad presented a modified parenting plan that included comfort days and abundance practice to balance their methods. The judge listened without expression, occasionally asking clarifying questions. She reviewed the custody evaluation reports, the therapist's recommendations, and the competing proposals for our care. When she finally turned to us, her eyes were kind but tired. My sister went first, clutching both stuffed animals. She explained in her 7-year-old voice how hungry felt different from regular hungry, how cold felt when you couldn't get warm, how scary it was to be locked outside at night. She didn't cry or dramatize, just stated facts the way our parents had taught us to endure hardship. My brother presented his documentation with the same methodical approach he'd learned from Dad. Page by page, he showed the progression from discipline to deprivation to systematic abuse. He used their own words against them, showing how their methods had escalated beyond any reasonable interpretation of preparation. I spoke last, describing the difference between Catherine's home and everywhere else we'd lived. I explained how we'd been trained to lie about our circumstances, to perform gratitude while suffering, to hide evidence of our parents' methods. The judge sitting there looking tired while lawyers debate whether making kids sleep outside counts as cultural diversity in parenting. Now that's a plot twist even reality TV wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. I talked about the difference between building resilience and breaking children. The judge asked our parents directly if they believed their methods had been harmful. Mom consulted her journal before responding that harm was subjective and temporary discomfort created permanent strength. Dad added that loving parents sometimes had to make difficult choices for their children's future benefit. Dr. Winters testified about the psychological impact of systematic deprivation, the difference between controlled challenges and sustained trauma. She presented her analysis of my brother's documentation, showing clear patterns of escalating abuse disguised as education. She explained how our parents' wealth made their actions more damaging, not less. The hearing stretched into evening. Lawyers argued about precedent and interpretation. Social workers debated placement options and reunification possibilities. Our parents' supporters filled the gallery, occasionally murmuring agreement with their lawyers' points. Finally, the judge called for a recess. We waited in a small room while she deliberated. Catherine sat between us, not speaking, just being present. My brother reviewed his notes obsessively. My sister colored in a book Catherine had brought. I watched the clock and tried not to think about worst-case scenarios. When they called us back, the courtroom was tense. The judge began by acknowledging the complexity of the case, the competing values at stake, the difficulty of balancing parental rights with child welfare. She spoke about cultural sensitivity and the danger of imposing singular parenting standards. Then her tone shifted. She addressed our parents directly, noting that their wealth and education gave them choices most impoverished families never had. She observed that they'd subjected us to hardships they themselves no longer faced, creating artificial poverty while maintaining their own comfort. She called this fundamental hypocrisy that undermined any philosophical justification. She ruled that we would remain in Catherine's custody indefinitely. Our parents would have supervised visitation only, with a therapist present to ensure no psychological manipulation. They were required to undergo extensive counseling to address their own trauma before any consideration of expanded contact. Our parents' lawyer immediately objected, citing religious freedom and parental autonomy. The judge cut him off, stating that freedom to believe didn't include freedom to harm. She warned that any attempts to circumvent her orders would result in criminal charges. Mom's composure finally cracked. She stood up, clutching her journal, and began reading frantically from early entries about her own childhood hunger. Dad tried to calm her, but she pushed past him, approaching the bench while describing nights spent cold and afraid. Court officers moved to intervene, but she collapsed before they reached her, sobbing about wanting us to be strong enough to survive. The judge maintained order while paramedics checked on Mom. Dad knelt beside her, his usual calm shattered. For the first time, I saw them as Dr. Winters had described, not evil but damaged, perpetuating cycles they couldn't break. Their supporters watched in shock as their leaders fell apart. We left through a side exit to avoid the crowd. Catherine drove us home in silence, my sister asleep between us, my brother staring out the window. The street was empty when we arrived. No protesters or watchers, just ordinary suburban quiet. Inside, Catherine made hot chocolate again, the same ritual as our first night back. We sat at her kitchen table, processing what had happened. My brother finally closed his documentation notebook, his purpose for keeping it complete. My sister asked if our parents were sick, and Catherine explained that sometimes hurt people hurt others, even when they love them. That night, I heard Catherine on the phone with Dr. Winters discussing therapy schedules and support groups. Not for us to learn poverty, but to unlearn the survival mechanisms we'd developed, to discover who we were beyond endurance and documentation and performance. The next morning came with blessed normalcy. Breakfast without earning it, showers with hot water, clean clothes that fit properly, school where we could focus on learning instead of hiding hunger. Catherine packed lunches with extra snacks, just in case we needed them. Our parents' movement fractured after the hearing. Some supporters claimed we'd been brainwashed by the system. Others questioned methods they'd previously defended. The online forums split into factions, debating where preparation ended and abuse began. Mom and Dad retreated from public view, their lawyer issuing a statement about respecting the court's decision while pursuing appropriate appeals. Weeks passed with cautious peace. Therapy sessions where we learned to name what had happened to us, family dinners where no one had to earn their plate, bedtimes in actual beds with warm blankets and no fear of midnight drills. My brother started a new notebook, this one filled with normal teenage thoughts instead of evidence. My sister played with both stuffed animals, no longer hiding them. Catherine never promised forever, but she promised consistency for now. She helped us navigate supervised visits with our parents, awkward hours in a therapist's office where Mom and Dad struggled to connect without tests or deprivation. They brought gifts we were allowed to keep, books we could read for pleasure, clothes that fit properly. Slowly, we learned the difference between strength and survival, between preparation and paranoia, between love and control. Our parents attended their own therapy, confronting childhoods they'd never processed, trauma they'd transformed into teaching. The therapist said healing would take time for all of us. I got promoted at McDonald's, saving money for college instead of secret socks. My brother joined the computer club, using his documentation skills for normal projects. My sister started second grade reading above level, no longer conserving energy for imagined hardship. Some nights I still dream about garage floors and empty stomachs. My brother still documents things obsessively, though now it's baseball statistics and coding projects. My sister sometimes hides food in her room, little stashes Catherine pretends not to notice while gently reinforcing abundance. We're not fixed. Maybe we never will be completely, but we're fed and warm and safe. We're learning that love doesn't require suffering, that strength can grow from joy as well as hardship, that survival is just the beginning, not the end goal. Our parents continue therapy, sending letters the therapist reviews before we see them. They're learning too, slowly understanding how their fear of poverty became something worse than poverty itself, how preparation became prison, how love became harm. Catherine says healing isn't linear. Some days we trust easily, others we can't believe the food will still be there tomorrow, but each warm shower, each full meal, each night in a real bed adds up. We're building new foundations, one ordinary day at a time. The poverty practice is over. We're finally learning to live. Appreciate you sticking with me through all the questions and overthinking. Definitely kept things interesting. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. Catch you in the next one.